Hi, Misha here, and last time we looked at CIS separatist droids that were, combat, the B1, the B2, the Droidco. This time I want to look at some specialized droids from Holowan. Last time we looked at Bactoid and their droids, but these are from a different manufacturer, and they predate the Clone Wars. In fact, some can trace their roots back 4,000 years. And these are more multi-purpose. Interestingly, they're all technically fourth degree droids, but I would argue that's kind of a disservice because really the B1 was considered a fourth degree. So maybe a little subterfuge to kind of hide their true capabilities. I can definitely think of one droid dating back 3,000 plus years that would be offended by being called a fourth degree. And we'll talk about first their in-universe, and then we'll talk about their real world, and I'll critique the Black Series 6-inch figures here in the second half of the video. Again, just hanging out, having fun, not in any hurry, not in any rush. If you are, watch the video later, or whatever it is. I'm just trying to have some fun and relax on a Friday. So with that, let's just dive in and actually go back before the Clone Wars. A good a place as any to begin with the IG100 series, aka the MagnaGuard or MagnaDroid or heuristically programmed. This was a bodyguard droid primarily, although it was also a command level droid and combat droid besides, but always very much an elite thing, and kind of the beginning of the Clone Wars era Holowan production. There was actually a predecessor company, Flut Systems, that had kind of worked on assassin droids, and they seem to have had some relation with the previous Lancer droid, but they were bankrupt long before the Clone Wars. And Holowan would actually pick up their designs, inherit them, and they would produce the IG series Lancer droid, which was really the first version made for the banking clan, which is actually where IG comes from, intergalactic banking clan, and they would have quite a few Lancers before the Clone Wars kicked off, and then they would donate their Lancers to the CIS effort, and this would actually lead directly to Count Dooku contracting with Holowan to produce the IG-100 series as advanced bodyguard droids for high-ranking separatist officers, officials, dignitaries, whatever, including, of course, General Grievous himself, who had a very hate and then love relationship with this model of droid. While still considered a fourth degree droid, this was a much more advanced and intelligent droid, given not just programming but also actual experiences to combat foes that would probably try to assassinate high-ranking officials such as the Jedi. Not protecting them, but killing the Jedi. And they were designed for better flexibility, better durability. They had a very durable frame and chassis as far as armor, and they were very redundant. They could operate with one or more limbs separated. They could even operate with their head removed because there was kind of a backup photoreceptor sensor, basically eye in their chest, and backup processors. And they were actually very customizable, both with their programming and their bodies themselves. They were really the same height as a standard B1 battle droid, just a hair taller, maybe 1.95 meters. They did way more because of their denser armor plating. They were about 120 kilograms. Very much a human form plan. They had magnetic feet for better surface crisping and things of that nature. And they were actually primarily trained with and expert with electrostaffs like this guy has here. Hand-to-hand fighting. Now these staffs were made of frick, essentially Beskar, before Beskar was Beskar. Either way, light saber resistant metal, allowing them to fight in, typically in close situations, guard duty or otherwise. They would operate in pairs of 2 or sometimes 3. Essentially, one would occupy the Jedi and the other would look for a weak spot and come in. And when 3, you would expect kind of pretty much the same strategy. But they were also quite expert with blasters, flechettes, rocket launchers. They actually had quite an affinity for exploding things. And so they could be used as combat droids. They were typically sent in as commando special forces, and they would automatically have authority over other battle droids, B1, B2 droid, because they were basically the droid equivalent of a high-ranking officer. And they could even pilot starfighters. The Rogue class, the Porax P-38 was really what they were meant for. But and they could pilot other things besides. And that's why they were pretty much had a human form, very large hands for grasping, quite large feet, and again quite durable and also quite customizable, as we see here. While the MagnaGuards would guard many in this CIS, including Count Dooku, and they would also protect several installations and be on board some ships of note, like flagships, as guards. Of course, they're most famous as General Grievous's bodyguards, and this is one here. His had capes and kind of the head wrap that were intended to make them look like Kalish, which is his species. Like I said, he originally was not terribly fond of these, but yeah, it's a story. And his were all battle-hardened. Those that didn't succeed, well, died. And so we see these in Revenge of the Sith. There are at least 2 on board the Invisible Hand that we see, IG-101 and IG-102, so his kind of primary ones. Of course, they don't make it out. He does. And he has at least 4 more, possibly more, on Utapau when he ultimately is killed. And of course, they appear in several variants and guises throughout the Clone Wars as well. And this really was quite a success. Essentially based on earlier models. You see very similar models even before the Clone Wars, but the individual IG-100s here were made as a very custom, unique contract for the CIS. And they were produced in the dozens, if not hundreds, but they were pretty expensive, so, you know, they were left to that. And what have you. So, moving on from the Clone Wars, next up we have everyone's favorite, guard / assassin turned bounty hunter turned nanny, IG-11. And, of course, he's quite recognizable, but distinctly different. And we'll talk about that later. But post-Clone Wars, the Holowan systems, the Holowan labs, felt like they had a winner on their hands with the MagnaGuard series, and even though those were shut down and pretty much outlawed by the New Empire, for at least a time, Holowan was allowed to continue. And so they wanted to develop better, more advanced, more specialized droids, and actually one of the earliest efforts right after the Clone Wars was the so-called Thug droid, the Bruiser, the IG, and they would be actually purchased in considerable numbers by things like the Hutts and what have you. But next would come the IG-88 70 and 77 series, which were assassin droids and like guard droids, protector droids, that kind of thing. And IG-11 was part of this series, which was slightly different from the later one you're thinking of. Of course, they're very tall, over 2 meters, so taller than a MagnaGuard, and they have a lot of internal features. They're also considered a 4th degree droid, although I'd argue they're probably better than that. And they could use external weapons. And they kind of have a retro design. We'll see this actually a lot with Holowan post Clone Wars. And the kind of head and everything is a throwback to the original Flut assassin droid. They weren't as acrobatic or mobile as you might expect, but they were quite durable, so they kind of emphasized that and flexibility over movement. And these are made in at least reasonable numbers, and were a relatively successful product for Holowan around 18 BBY. So it's kind of one of the successors to the MagnaGuard and still in the IG series. Like many other earlier battle droids, the IG-70 series, which IG-11 was part of, was designed with more human-like appendages, hands, abilities to operate weapons, and this version really preferred more ranged weapons. That's because they were meant to be a bodyguard droid, a protector droid, that kind of thing, which was, quasi-illegal during the Galactic Empire, because, well, droids and Empire, what do you expect? But like I said earlier, the bodyguard, the thug guard type, the IGRM, was purchased and used, again, outer rims and everything, and it would take a long while for the Empire to really get their claws into things. So while not exactly doing things above board, Holowan was kind of allowed to get away with it in 18, 17 BBY, and so they produced this series, including IG-72, who was part of this group, but made some new friends, and Holowan made some bad decisions. You know him, you love him. He does not love you or any meatbags. IG88. I'm not sure if this is A, B, C, or D, because they look the same and were the same. And very, very, very similar to IG-11, at least externally. Where at least IG-11 and his series could pretend to be defensive, protective, this was an assassin droid. Holowan really wanted to push their luck here, and, they got what was coming to them. Assassin droids weren't even legal during the Republic, much less the Empire. So this was very much underground, black market. I think they realized that a lot of their clients were frankly sentient slugs and bounty hunters themselves. So around 16 BBY, they started working on the program. By 15 BBY, they had made a total of 5 prototypes. I guess I should say 1 prototype, IG88, and then 4 pre-production models, IG88 A, B, C, and D. So take it for what you will. Still kind of going back to the original Flut assassin design, this was internally quite different. It had a lot more sentience, although officially on paper it was still a 4th degree droid. This was a lie. It was misclassed on purpose. Kind of like when car companies mess with the emissions for testing and then don't. I wonder who I'm talking about there. So spec-wise, he's about the same height, about 2 meters. Like IG-11, he weighs around 140 kilograms, so a little chunkier, because he's built up with very sturdy armor, if he doesn't look like it. And He can use ranged weapons, but since he is an assassin droid, he's also very proficient, I should say, with close-in weapons, including a vibro axe. His favored primary was a DLT-20A blaster rifle, although he would often carry what was at the time the brand new E11 blaster carbine as a backup because, well, droids don't really get tired. And his hands were very much more like pincers. He's essentially clamps from Futurama, but they were sufficient for his needs. He was intended to be fitted with internal weaponry too, which is a change from the IG11. But here's the thing. As soon as the IG88A was activated, he copied himself to the other three models. No word on the original IG88. And then they killed everyone at Holowan Labs and escaped. They also made a new friend in IG72 and released him as well to go about his business. And so these were intended as assassin droids, but never really went anywhere because, they went somewhere. And out of the four that escaped, 3 of them would become bounty hunters. And, of course, this would get us to IG88 in the Imperial era. He was active as a bounty hunter for years, including becoming pretty much one of the best ones out there in the top couple. In fact, he was often considered to be the best outside of, say, Boba Fett himself, although Bosk might have something to say about that. But he would meet his end because of Boba Fett on Cloud City, and that'd be that, at least according to one account. And, well, what you're seeing this figure doing in the video is pretty much what he did in the film as well, for rather good reasons. But we'll get to the real world things about all these droids and my thoughts on the Black Series after we kind of wrap these up. Now we're changing gears, moving away from the IG series into the HK series, which stands for Hunter Killer, and is another product of Holowan, at least in the more or less modern era. But the design dates back about 4,000 years, at least the concept, to a wholly different company in the Old Republic era, the Xerxa company, which seems to be Czech, but either way, who developed the original HK01 prototype, who definitely did not lead a droid rebellion. No. Either way, they considered him a success and developed the HK24, which actually went into at least somewhat full production, but it wasn't as successful. It was a guard droid and an assassin droid at a time when the galaxy just really didn't need them. So, it's kind of there. But we fast forward quite a few years to another prototype, the HK47, who no one cares about and no one knows anything about, and was developed by an unknown Jedi called Riven. And, it was based on the HK24, but updated substantially, both in its weapon skills and ability to actually be a protocol droid, which was partly subterfuge, but also partly, you don't always need an assassin, so as expensive as droids are, let's make them a multi-tool. So he could be a protocol droid, a translator droid. He could also stalk and kill people, and even work as a battle droid. HK47 was a one-off, one-of-a-kind, and the galaxy barely survived him despite that. But he did lead to the HK50, which was designed for more mass production, again by Riven, and was essentially an improved version, better armor, better accuracy built in, so on and so forth, and was produced. So much so that afterwards, the Republic would ban the HK series, and this is the beginning of the prohibition on assassin droids. So production would just simply go underground. And that was the kind of Old Republic era, 4 to 3,000 years ago. And the idea would lay dormant, which is kind of how the Star Wars universe works, because it's very old. But given enough time, what's old becomes new again, and the HK system platform concept was rediscovered, reinvented by Holowan Systems, either before or during the Clone Wars. And they themselves would make a couple of prototypes known as HK87 and HK87, which will get more and more away from the protocol and even the guard and become more either assassin or combat droid because, well, the Clone Wars. And this actually would lead to the HK77, which was put into production, at least in small numbers, towards the end of the Clone Wars. And it was essentially a combat droid complete with built-in weaponry. But again, the end of the war changed the market again, and the Empire's kind of prohibition on things. So the next model would kind of return to its roots as a protocol droid and guard protector who just might do a little light assassination on the side. The HK87 series, which seems to have been produced in quite large numbers, like the MagnaGuards, they specialized in using electrostaffs, also were not strangers to attacking Jedi, although maybe not as specialized as a MagnaGuard there. They were also quite customizable by their owners, users, operators, and could serve as protocol droids. They had quite thick armor. One interesting aspect about them is they were actually quite acrobatic and flexible for a droid. Very much droid-like, and definitely have a relationship to the original HKs, if not in appearance, at least in effect and capabilities, and also definitely have a certain kind of look to the old MagnaGuard. But yeah, you can definitely tell, as I said earlier, Holowan was trying to make more specialized droids, so this was more of the human face friendly version, and the IG series would evolve into more of the utilitarian industrial version here. And these would come in several different casing colors and types. And finally, we end with a more aggressive, more assassin version. Kind of think of the first HK87 we looked at as more of the guard, protector, sentinel version. But this is the one more sent out, less fancy, more go out and get someone, kill someone. These could be used as capturers, not just killers too. And they seem to sport a modified version of the E5 used by the CIS. I like to think of it as the E5A. It is a little lighter weight, a little better on the accuracy, but it does have slightly weaker bolts, and it doesn't have the full 500 shots. So, but to be fair, the HK series had worked on accuracy for literally millennia and were among the more accurate droids with weapons. They too also liked explosives. So they did not just carry electrostaffs, they could carry blasters, and often did. So here we have a different deco version. Sure got a cape though, because, Star Wars universe, capes. And it does not seem like these were still in production into the New Republic era, but that enough were out there, and it does seem like Imperial governors, Moffs, acquired these, so one way or the other, they seem to have been approved. Of course, most of the designers at Holowan would be wiped out by IG88, but that's not to say the company itself would immediately go out of business. Even if it did, it would have been nationalized by the Empire, and they seem to have taken a shine to the HK series. Presumably, these still had some protocol droid elements. They also would self-destruct if compromised, captured, interrogated, but otherwise were very good, ruthless hunters. And much like the MagnaGuards before them, they were geared towards fighting Jedi, Force users, that kind of thing. And even though they don't look like the original HK01 and HK47, they are very much kind of spiritually in that vein of deadly, intelligent, and effective. With the in-universe thing out of the way, let's talk about real-world design and the Black Series figures themselves, because I think all of these, to one degree or another, have received criticism, but also some have received praise. And I'm actually impressed that one has not fallen over yet. It'll happen. Let's begin back where we began at the beginning, with the beginning gun guy, the MagnaGuard. So, in the universe where it was designed for primarily the Revenge of the Sith, this was meant to be General Grievous' bodyguard, and that's exactly what it is. Something a little more interesting and more Kalish than that, and not a whole lot there. Just pike-wielding baddies, and they definitely appear on and off, and of course in a lot of video games besides. And I think a lot of people really wanted to get this guy in the Black Series. And then when they did, they were somewhat disappointed. But I'm not. I've seen some criticize saying he is too small, too short. Like I said earlier, he's really the same height as a standard battle droid. Maybe an inch or two taller, which, how's that really going to translate into plastic? The fact is, here's an Obi-Wan. And, he's slightly taller, and Obi-Wan is not the tallest, but I don't know. It may not be exactly micrometer accurate, but he's taller than Obi-Wan. It works. I don't really have a problem with that. Now, more legitimate, I would say, some have said there's these shoulder pads pop off. They are hinged, so when the arms move, mine seem pretty good, but I can definitely believe that some people's move around a lot. Blue tack is your friend. I think it's better to have them hinged where they will pop off versus trying to glue them and then that come off if worst happens. And the legs. These are very spindly legs. And warping occurs. One of mine is a little bowed. Not too bad. Not as bad as some. But and there's this thin area right in here, which is where one of mine is a little bowed, which, unless it's just pitch perfect, will curve a bit because the legs are so long on these. Luckily, they are flexible. So, feet too. One of my feet was actually pretty frozen when I got him, but hairdryer fixed that. So, a little bit of QC on the legs. I fully admit that. But I also admit that since these were CGI creations, much like the battle droids before, getting them into 6-inch scale was going to be difficult no matter what. The effort, I think, was worthwhile. You do get a nice actual cape. And they come with 2 versions of the Electro Staff, which I don't think anyone was expecting. You might say active or inactive, but also just kind of one's more of Clone Wars style, one's more of the kind of Revenge of the Sith style. So while not perfect, not an A+, 100% home run, I think these are like an A-, B+. I think they're being a little harshly criticized for what they are. Plus, you could pick them up on sale for about $20 for a little while on Amazon, so I did, and I don't regret it. Next up, IG11. Now, this was not a standard release back when it came out. I think it was a Best Buy, although it eventually appeared online, and I got it for like $13. And yeah, it's a reuse of the IG88 body, but that's okay because that's pretty much what IG11 was. The reason they didn't just use IG88 in The Mandalorian was canon or Legends, either way, they didn't want to disrupt his fate. And of course, this needed to be a more sympathetic droid than a ruthless bounty hunter. And yeah, it goes on from there. Now, this mold, it doesn't have a lot of flexibility. There's a lot going on. And honestly, I think it moves more than a lot of people think. But also, I'd be careful moving it. It's got rubber on it, which is kind of odd for Black Series. The arms do move, but you do have to be, the elbows, excuse me, but you have to be really careful. Can't remember if there's a knee on this or not. They do kick up. Actually, pretty good movement on the claw feet, wires. But you know what? Now, of course, in The Mandalorian, he moves around, so that's fine. Yeah, but that's, again, mostly CGI. He does have the two bandoliers, which was something done to differentiate him. He has one actual holster back here for a gun, and then I found that these bandoliers are handy on any Black Series because you can just kind of shove things in them, and his blaster rifle fits really well. There's really only one issue with this, and it's the hands, or clamps. IG-11 had more human-looking hands, more like a battle droid, more pincery, but still. But because they're reusing the IG-88, they didn't change it, and because it was a store exclusive, they just really thought it was worth the tooling. That's the only thing I can really say wrong with it. Also, there's these two pegs on this one and on this one. That's actually to hold the blasters. His are special. They're not just your standard E11 and DLT-20. They actually have small holes drilled in them so you can pop them in, and they stay in really well. So you can have him holding things if you want. Of course, the head moves. He's fine. I kind of wish he'd been a mainline release. They might have at least retooled the forearms to give him the right hands. Maybe since he's hung around, maybe they didn't think he'd stay in The Mandalorian because, he essentially died at the end of Season 1, Series 1 if you prefer, but then came back. So maybe we'll get a re-release of him as IG-12 or whatever. Or we can have IG-11 Magistrate. We've got Magistrate Grief Cargo, so why not? But let's talk about why he can't really move. With the original IG-88, actually this is the archive, which some say they made some minor tweaks to. Either way, he was cheap, the original was not, so I got the archive. But the prop, and IG-88 was definitely a prop in, Empire Strikes Back, was literally bolted to the floor and put together with scrap metal. As rather famously known, his head is part of a Rolls-Royce engine. Other bits and bobs are from the set. In fact, bits of IG-88 appeared way back in A New Hope. His head was a drink dispenser, and his body appeared in Cloud City, which kind of leads to the canonical thing of, well, Boba Fett had already killed him. That's why he's there. The truth is, he was just set dressing and put in there to kind of fill out the bounty hunters. He literally didn't just not talk. He didn't move. So this design was never meant to move. So to make a figure that is like super flexible is not really possible. And yeah, he has the same limitations as IG-11, but he actually has a different overlay here. Here's his blaster. I don't actually know where this goes. Put it in his hands. He's got a scabbard on the back that holds either his E11 or DLT-20, but above it he's got a socket for his vibro axe, which is unique to him. So he comes with 3 weapons, which just seems appropriate, and pretty cool storage system, so he can hold all of his weapons, which I always appreciate. And this is another one that I see people criticize as being too short. But I think, again, they're kind of... he was taller, but in the film he was on a step. up behind. He's only about 2 meters, so about 6.5 foot if even. So here's Obi-Wan again. He is noticeably taller than Obi-Wan. And I think that's good enough. I think it's just because he's so skinny and people expect things to be huge in their minds. I don't know, but I feel like even if they're not 100% to scale, the notion is there. This thing is taller, this thing is shorter. If it's by 1/10 of an inch or a 20th or a 5th, it is what it is. Keep in mind, again, he was in the archive. This is back when the retail was $20, on sale $15. You got him, you got 3 weapons. I was never disappointed because the idea of an IG88 in action pose is kind of funny to me. He's meant to stand there and be a collection of parts. Your mileage may vary, though. So moving on to the initial HK87. This is from The Mandalorian, the season when he meets Ahsoka Tano. I think this is probably a figure that's not terribly controversial. I think most people do like, and I do too. The cloak, the rubber overlay here, and this thing here. And I don't know if it was intended, but there's a hole in his wire sash thing in his back that just really holds his E5 very, very well. And since the 3 3/4 version, the vintage series, has a peg on the back for his weapon, I just have to wonder if that was intentional. Oh well. And this was actually a new mold, even though it's essentially a shrunk down E5. So he got a new one. My only gripe is I wish he had come with an electro staff. That would seem like an easy one. So I gave him the spare one from the MagnaGuard. Like I said earlier, he came with 2, so I thought giving this guy one of them would be fitting. That's my only small complaint. I guess they didn't because he was pretty much an all-new body, even a new weapon, a new cloak, so maybe the budget just ran out. And remember, this guy was kind of developed and put into production at the end of COVID, so yeah, he was a bit of a victim of the plastic-free packaging, which to me didn't really matter, but I get it. And unfortunately, we have very, very, very little lore or even out-of-universe information on the HK87 series. They're obviously paying homage to HK47 from the game, and I think everyone's just waiting for an HK47 to be in the gaming greats. I think they'll do it, but the problem is he would need all new tooling, and that's not typically how they do the gaming things. But I don't think this is this is probably the least controversial figure on the table, but what do you think? And this is probably the most. And this is one I held off getting until the packet came in, was on deep discount, like $29 delivered. And I'm actually really glad I did, because I thought it was just going to be the same mold, the same everything as the previous one. And the base body is. But the details are totally different. The body overlay is different. The cape is even different. The only thing that's really repeat on the accessory part is his E5. And I do think he should have come with something else. The E5 is fitting, but yeah, since he's reusing tooling and is actually cheaper to make than the previous one, and originally came in a pretty deluxe pack, I think 2 weapons would have been appropriate. But other than that, I like him. Of course, a lot of the complaints online have to do with his coloration and the paint on the head. I believe you. I will just say, sometimes being blind has its advantages, and I think this is one of them. Probably if I could see it, bug me too. But I can't, so it doesn't. So I'm happy with the way things are. And again, I'm just happy that he has a very different look. Even the back piece is different. This definitely looks like more of a soldier version. The previous HK87 looks more of a kind of a house droid. A little fancier, pantsier. This one's definitely more to the point. And of course, these are from the Ahsoka series, where we see a number of them. And as they showed, they're actually very flexible. I would say out of the droids we have here, this is the most stable and flexible one. They don't really suffer from spindly legs. The feet are big enough. They're not the hugest in the world. I just said hugest. I don't care. The arms are nice and flexible. The head's got movement. The cape gets out of the way. We didn't do plastic cape. We did. So yeah, as far as the posability, I think, even though I agree that the first one is objectively better and cooler, he's a little more limited because of his stuff going on. This one is more of the mess around with type. And in some ways might be the most fun to pose and customize. And if we can only just get that HK87 now, tooling or not. Although they have, come to think of it, they have done some pretty advanced tooling for some game guys lately, some of the Darths and things. So, yeah, maybe. But what do you think? Does this guy really offend, or can you live with him? I'm curious from a sided point of view what you think. So wrapping up, the IG series, the IG100, the IG11, the IG88. Yeah. Now there are plenty of other ones in Legends and canon. The IG86 was meant to be a battle droid made at the end of the Clone Wars. Didn't really mention him. You see plenty of others, especially like the named models. And then I had a little bit of headcanon-y stuff with the HKs. And I don't know that Holowan actually made them, but it kind of fits their MO a bit. And we don't know who's making them in the modern era. And if you look in Legends, there's a ton of them. In official canon, you have far fewer. But I split these off from the Battle Droids video I did, looking at the standard B1 Battle Droid, the B2 Super Battle Droid, and the Destroyer Droid, the Droidka. Those were frontline, field, combat, mass production, even the Droidka. These are more indoors, single mission, or operating in groups to do things. And again, they had a bit more of a element of being a protocol droid, at least some of them, other things than just a combat droid. A B1 isn't good for anything else, maybe holding up a wall, but these were more multifaceted, hence why IG11 and IG88 became bounty hunters. And should mention that, following the Clone Wars, of course, the droid army was shut down. Production was outlawed. And really by the era of the New Republic, parts for these, especially the IG series, maybe not so much the HK, because they were newer, and they were kind of, at least tacitly backed by the Empire, were running out. That's why we see with IG11 and the Mandalorian. I don't know. I can't really explain why sometimes I talk about Star Wars, and the other times you won't hear me mention it for months. It's just the mood hits me. None of these are new. I've had all of these for a year. I mean, I think the MagnaGuard and the Assassin version of the HK87 are the newest ones, but like IG11, IG88, I've had for years. I don't know. I just felt like it. Maybe because I was talking about the battle droids and was thinking about, should I include the MagnaGuard? I decided not to, because I thought, well, that kind of leads into these others, and I'd rather just, And again, they're all kind of controversial figures in the Black Series. There are some legitimate criticisms for sure, but I think the gripes are kind of overstated, because these are all very difficult molds to do and mass produce. Keep in mind, these aren't custom model kits being put together by people with love and care on an individual basis. They're made in China, shipped overseas, and a couple of these were done during the pandemic, and I can tell you, quality control suffered for everything between about 2020 and 2023. We don't like it, that's just the reality. Anyway, the Assassin, the Guard droids, beginning with the Clone Wars and running through the New Republic era. Maybe next time we'll look at security droids, police droids. What do you think? This is Misha, and I'm going to go have dinner.